This conference will now be recorded.
Hi, welcome everyone. That's our cue to begin. My name is Emily Hill, and for those of you who do not know me, I work for the Presbyterian Church in Canada, the national office, and I work in Canadian Ministries. I'm the education program coordinator, which means we have this awesome, which means I have a great job of being able to connect with all of you and to welcome different presenters, experts on different topics. This webinar series that we're doing right now over the next month is about seniors ministry, about older adult ministry. So I know all of you who are joining us probably have a passion for that. For those of you who are participating, I'd ask you to keep your cameras and your volume off for now, just because we are going to be posting this and it will be online for a while. So just for the sake of your privacy, yeah, please keep your cameras and your volume muted. That's the first housekeeping item. The second one is just so that you do know it is being recorded and will be out there. So you should see somewhere on your screen a little thing that looks like a talking bubble, and that is the chat box. You can ask questions in the chat box at any time, and I'll bring them to Pat at the end, and we'll have a little discussion at the end with any of your questions. So that's how you can get in contact with me. If you have any issues during the webinar, certainly please let me know and I'll do my best to help you out with those. We have one question, which is, will the slideshow be downloadable? And the answer to that is yes. After this is over, we will be posting the recording of the webinar plus the slideshow on our previous webinars webpage. And if those of you who signed up, who registered officially, you'll get notification when those are available. For those of you who don't, I will put my email address in the chat box, and you're welcome to contact me anytime to get the recording or the slideshow. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to Pat Baker. Pat is a colleague coming to us from PC USA, and I'm going to turn it over to her to do her own introduction. But I just wanted to say a warm welcome, Pat, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Emily, and it is certainly a pleasure to be a part of this wonderful webinar series with our neighbors from the North. My husband, you've already have my bio, so you can read a little bit about myself, but I did want you to know a little bit more. My husband and my husband is a retired Presbyterian minister. We live in Lilburn, Georgia, which is east of Atlanta. I'm not sure if you know much about the state of Georgia, but we live in a small suburb east of Atlanta. We do have two grown children. One of them lives 800 miles from us, and one of them lives 2,000 miles from us. And they have three grandchildren, all under the age of 5. So we don't get to see them very often, especially these days, but that's a little bit about me and my family. I discovered my special gift of working with family caregivers in the early 1980s when I did older adult ministry in Texas. And I found that I had more caregivers coming to my door at the church asking for help than I really did the older adults themselves. So I decided to start a caregiver support group for those people in our congregation. And really the rest is history. Since '81, I have always held caregiver support groups, facilitated one. Currently, I'm facilitating 3 caregiver support groups, one that I have in my home and one that I do for the Emory Integrated Memory Care Clinic, and one that I do for the county employees where I used to work who are family caregivers. So I really have my hand on the pulse of caregivers every day, and during our lives, I'm doing a lot of Zoom caregiver support groups, but it seems to be working well. And actually, I'm getting some people that are coming to support group now that haven't been able to physically come before, but now they can come because we're online. So that's a little bit more about me, and I'm going to go ahead and take my picture offline so I won't be distraction, and then we will get started. One of my favorite passages from the Bible is one that we find in John 6:28, and it says, "What must we do to perform the works of God?" And I know oftentimes that caregivers, ask that question, especially when they're dealing with struggles, but also when they are really there for the person they're caring for. So now let us pray. Caregiver, I love that word, Lord. It says so much about who we are called to be in your kingdom. Care indicates the deep regard we hold for others. Giver echoes the spiritual assurance that you love a cheerful giver. As giver, I will strive to bestow your special gifts of faith, hope, and love. I will attempt to empower the people I care for to use their own abilities and strengths. I will share with them the belief that your Holy Spirit is alive and well within them. Caregiver is who you are to me, Lord. May I give care to the others in return. Amen. Okay, so caring for the caregiver and how a faith community can respond. This is what we're going to cover today. Who are caregivers? Situations creating need for care. My responsibility chart and self-assessment. Caregiver roles and responsibilities. Caregiver involvement, when is it time? Emotional aspects of caregiving, problem solving, a faith community's response, and a few resources. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today are ways that you can, in your congregation or in your faith community, what you can do for caregivers. And so in situations that they might be dealing with, that you can help them with. And exercise that you can do with caregivers to help them see a little bit more about what their role is and some of their responsibilities. And then we'll get into some of the emotional aspects of caregiving, which then lead obviously to problem solving. And then I will offer you several different ideas of things that you can do in your faith communities to respond to these caregivers. I was very fortunate to get to work for the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregiving, Mrs. Jimmy Carter. And I worked several years for them, and now I am doing volunteer work with her dealing with dementia program. But she's very famous for this quote: "There are only 4 kinds of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who currently are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers." So usually when I quote her, this passage, I have people raise their hand and say, how many of you have been caregivers? How many of you currently are caregivers? How many will be caregivers, and how many of those will need caregivers? And hopefully everybody will pretty much by the end raising their hand, as that we don't know, but a lot of people will need caregivers in the future. There are 4 types of caregivers, so I want to give you those definitions. The first one is family caregivers. Family caregivers provide care and assistance to others, usually as part of an ongoing relationship and as an expression of concern and love for a relative, a friend, or a neighbor. These people are usually not paid for their services. Professional caregivers. They provide health care or social services to others as a part of their job or profession, using skills, knowledge, and insight gained through formal training. These professional caregivers are usually paid. Dual caregivers. They provide cares for relatives, friends, or neighbors, in addition to their professional caregiving roles and responsibilities. Oftentimes we know of people that are RNs or LPNs that are taking care of family members, but they also are going to a job during the day taking care of others, and those are the dual caregivers. And then volunteer caregivers. They provide support, assistance, or care with no fees for service through a program offered by the community, such as a congregation, a civic group, or hospice. In some situations, volunteer caregivers may be professionally trained in offering their professional service as a volunteer in a volunteer capacity. Okay, so now what kind of situations are created for a need for care, and situations that are creating a need for care. So the first one is, oh, my mouse just doesn't seem to be working. No, there, or not working how I want it to be. Sorry about that. Physical illnesses or disabilities, mental illnesses, dementia, developmental disabilities, addictive diseases, and difficulties of frail older adults. And you can probably think of some other situations that would create a need for care, but these are really the primary ones, at least that I see and I've seen for all these years I've been working with caregivers. It was interesting that when I started my caregiver support groups in the 1980s, most of the people that were coming were caring for a spouse or a parent that had had a stroke or a heart attack. Every once in a while, I'd get someone that is dealing with a dementia. Nowadays, of the 3 support groups that I am running, I'm facilitating now, probably 90% of the people that are coming to support groups are dealing with dementia with the person they're caring for. So times have changed through the years. So when working with caregivers, it is helpful to see where they are in their caregiving journey. So I have this exercise, which is called my responsibility tree or chart. So I'd like for you to, if you've got a piece of paper right there before you, I'm gonna let you do a little exercise. I would like for you to, on this piece of paper, write down a few things. So this is an exercise to help clarify your personal responsibilities. And you might be a caregiver and you might not be a caregiver, but we're going to pretend that you're all caregivers. And so you can see how this responsibility chart works. So I want you to write the name or family position of every living member of your family. And this might not get into cousins and things like that unless you're caring for them. This would include spouses, your parents, you and your spouse's parents, grandparents, children, grandchildren. So just take a couple minutes now to write down the names or the positions in your family. And I'm going to be quiet for just a minute while you do that. Okay, so that moment of silence, and that was literally just 1 minute. It's amazing how long that seems. So first I want you to now look at that list that you've written on that piece of paper, and now underline the name of each person for whose financial welfare you feel responsible. So you might not be totally responsible, but you might feel responsible for that. And so again, underline the name of each person for whose financial welfare you feel responsible. Now, underline the name of each person for whose emotional welfare you feel responsible. So this is again, underline the name for each person whose emotional welfare you feel responsible. Now, some of your names may have 2 lines under them. Third, underline the name of each person for whose daily welfare you feel responsible. So this would be getting them to doctor's appointments, calling them on the phone and making sure they're taking their medication at the right time, taking care of grandchildren while your children work. It could be a variety of things. So now you've got some names that may have 3 lines under them. Now I want you to draw a circle around the name of each person who shares with you equal or greater part of any of these responsibilities. So that could be a sibling, it could be a spouse. You might be caring for your mother with your dad. So now draw a circle around the names of those that have equal or greater part of any of these responsibilities. So after I have caregivers do all these things, then we have some discussion questions. So how many of you, how many in your own generation or above do you feel responsible? Count those. And then how many people younger than you do you feel responsible? How many do you share responsibilities with? And did any of you underline your own name? I certainly hope you did, because you're certainly responsible for your own self. And then we talk about what this exercise makes people feel, how it makes them feel. And oftentimes they go, well, no wonder I've been so overwhelmed with my caregiving duties. Or, you know, I see that, gosh, nobody is really helping me. I'm taking all these challenges on by myself. So this is a really good discussion for caregivers to get them to really start talk about their feelings. Then I talk to caregivers about kind of doing a self-assessment about how they are doing as caregivers. So along the caregiving journey, they really need to assess themselves and how they are managing. So first we say, survey what is in your ability to control and manage. So think about what is in your ability to control or manage about your caregiving role. Identify your self-care deficits and decide if you can change them. There are probably some things that you aren't doing to take care of yourself as a caregiver. And so if you need to change those, you need to look at those and see maybe who else on that chart that you're taking care of can help you with that. We ask caregivers to examine their goals, kind of talk about what their goal is. Of course, those probably are challenging, especially in days like today. I mean, no caregiver was expecting to be dealing with COVID-19 along with their caregiving duties. And so some goals go out the window and you've got to examine your other goals. Be realistic. Be realistic about what you can do as a caregiver. Be realistic about what your talents are, what your abilities are. Don't take on more than you need to as a caregiver. Don't take on some things that maybe other people could be doing. And we'll look at an exercise in a few minutes that addresses that issue. And then really what you need to get caregivers to start thinking about is their care team. If they don't have a care team, why don't they? So your care team would be people that help you take care of the person that you're responsible for. So it could be a spouse, it could be a minister in your church, it could be your physician, it could be a healthcare worker, it could be nursing home staff if the person that you feel responsible for is living in a facility. So look at who that is on your care team, and if you don't have a care team and don't feel like you have a care team, then why not? And you need to assess that. Okay, so now we're going to look at caregiver roles and responsibilities, because sometimes caregivers don't really figure out what the specific roles are. But when you go through this list that I'm going to go through with you right now, you'll see there are a whole lot of roles and responsibilities that caregivers have. And to be able to go through these with family caregivers or people that are caring for neighbors or friends and things like that can be really helpful for them to figure out kind of what their role is, and maybe some roles that they aren't performing that other people could be performing. So the first role is advisor, and that's offering recommendations to help a loved one identify potential challenges, talking about concerns, sharing information, and considering alternatives that may help to maximize their independence and their quality of life. Advocate. Look out for your loved one's best interests as an authorized agent, such as a power of attorney or a power for health care. Ensuring a person you serve gets the information, care, and support and treatment that they need and that they deserve. That's a very important role as an advocate. And some people that might be their only role with a family member. They might be a long distance caregiver and can't do hands-on caring, but they can advocate for their person that they're caring for, they feel responsible for. A coordinator. This is the person who arranges for services such as professional caregiving, physical therapy, maybe taking care of yard work, snow removal, heating and air conditioning repairs, scheduling appointments, coordinating deliveries. Also under the coordinator position is helping to facilitate end-of-life planning. And then there are a whole lot more under that one, but that's just a few. Evaluator, assessing a loved one's ability to live independently, handle his or her own personal care, manage medicines, operate a motor vehicle, and more. Also identifying and evaluating appropriate programs and services that best match the care receiver's needs and wishes. This is a very important role because someone needs to be able to think clearly enough and not maybe put in emotions, but think clearly enough to evaluate what that person really needs. Mediator. This is helping family members and others communicate with healthcare and social service providers, making decisions and resolving issues in a positive and helpful manner. You might be a mediator if you've got lots of siblings and you're trying to take care of your parents, and you might be the oldest child in your family and you've sort of been unofficially become the mediator for the rest of the siblings on the care of your parents. Protector, taking charge when necessary to help ensure the safety and well-being of a loved one. And then we get into several other elements that come under the role of provider. The first one is emotional, listening and responding to concerns, providing encouragement and moral support, and simply being there for someone. Financial, organizing bills, writing checks, balancing the checkbook, and providing money to help cover expenses. Oftentimes, at least in the past, not as much as now as it was in the past, is usually if there was a male sibling in the family, the women were doing the hands-on, but the male sibling was taking on the financial piece. And they could do that long distance and very easily. Now there's lots of male caregivers, and it's no longer necessarily that's the job that goes to the male caregiver, but that has been in the past. Physical, assisting with daily living activities, including personal care, household chores, meals, driving, a lot of things that come into the physical piece. Social, maintaining regular contact and minimizing isolation and boredom through relationships and keeping loved ones kind of in the loop with their friends. Boy, is this a hard one to do these days for caregivers. I talk to lots of caregivers who are taking care of someone within their own home. And what they were doing before was at least one day a week, they were taking their husband or wife to an adult day center, or they were taking them to visit with friends, which was giving them a break. But now they can't do this. And so their social lives have really changed a great deal. So they're dealing with that now and still trying to keep the person they're caring for in the loop with seeing family members, hopefully through a means of Zoom or something like that. And then certainly last but not least is the spiritual piece, helping people find meaning and purpose in life, maintaining hope, coping and finding peace through prayer and meditation. Okay, so oftentimes I have caregivers say to me, gosh, I just really don't know when I should step in to help my mother to do things around the house. Or I really don't know when I should step in and say, gosh, maybe you shouldn't be driving anymore because I noticed that, you know, you've had a few dings in your car. So here are 10 considerations on deciding to be more involved. And you can rank them between 1 and 10. So number 1 would be, so you can draw a long line under this consideration. And number 1 would be not a concern at all. In other words, you really hadn't thought that that was a concern and you hadn't talked to your parents about that at all. And then 10 would be a major concern. So now we'll go over those 10 and you can kind of see, you know, how this works. So the first one is the medical condition. So ask yourself the questions. Has your loved one been diagnosed with a disease, illness, or other medical condition that could impact his or her ability to function in daily life? So this might be a 1. This might be that they're physically, they're doing really well. Their medical condition is excellent. And so you really aren't worried about that at all. Or they could have been diagnosed recently with dementia. And so what was a 1 6 months ago is now maybe a 6, 7, or 10, but it's become a major concern. So you kind of see how that works. The next one, driving. And ask yourself the questions. If your loved one drives, is there a reason to believe he or she poses an above average risk for being involved in an accident? How are your loved one's vision, reflexes, and ability to respond in unexpected situations? If you're a long distance caregiver, you might not have ridden with a parent in quite a while. And so you were thinking maybe your concerns were a 1 or a 2, but then you go to visit them and you see when riding with them that maybe your concerns are now an 8 or a 9. And you see that there have been dings in the car and things like that. So you can see how those can change over time. Food and nutrition. Is your loved one eating balanced meals? Is his or her weight stable? Does he or she have a reasonable variety of food in the refrigerator? And what are the expiration dates on that food? Is some of it really old? And if they have poor eyesight, they can't see what the expiration dates are, and so they could eat something that could make them ill. Or does the food look really fresh and the expiration dates are way into the future? Something to keep an eye on just so someone doesn't become ill. Hygiene. Does it appear your loved one is bathing or brushing his or her teeth regularly? How are his or her overall appearance, grooming, and ability to match clothing compared to prior years? Are the bed linens and towels fresh? Does the soap in the bathroom appear to be used? If you have someone that's always dressed impeccably throughout their whole life, and all of a sudden they're starting to look a little disheveled, the clothes don't look clean, then maybe there are some concerns, and you might be marking your chart closer to the 10 at this point. Behavior. Does your loved one seem anxious or irritable? Does being away from home make him or her uncomfortable? Does he or she seem depressed? Is there inconsistency in the things they are saying? Does your loved one remember names, places, and current events? And of course, the behavior one comes to the forefront when people are been diagnosed with a dementia or before they've even been diagnosed with a dementia. So they might not have had any behavioral issues at all. They might just have had some medical conditions you were concerned with, but now you're starting to see that they are forgetting names or they're misplacing things. And so all of a sudden, behavior becomes something that you need to be more concerned about. Daily tasks. Our daily tasks, such as getting ready to go out and preparing a meal or shopping, overtly challenging, frustrating, or time-consuming for your loved ones? Does their living space appear clean? Is there a concern about hoarding? And these are all things that happen along in just part of their daily tasks each day that you might need to look at more carefully. And it might not be a concern at all, but it might be a major concern. Medication. Can your loved one manage his or her own medication properly, including the dosage, frequency, and changes in prescriptions? Does your loved one understand why he or she is taking the medication? Are prescriptions getting refilled in a timely manner? And of course, if some of these things aren't happening, then you're going to end up with someone becoming ill, being over-medicated, under-medicated. I know when my mother was caring for my grandmother who had dementia, one of the first signs that her dementia was getting worse was when she couldn't deal with her medications anymore. So it's a biggie. She was delusional. It's because she was over-medicating herself. Finances. Does it appear your loved one is capable of making sound financial decisions? Are they able to manage personal affairs and finances? Do they have reasonable amount of cash on hand? Have there been any unusual purchases or suspicious expenses or investments? And you can see how all of this can be really helpful for the caregivers that you're working with in your churches or congregations by helping them look at all of these. Mail and emails, is the mail stacking up? Is there a reason to suspect any past due or delinquent notices? Does your loved one appear to be a target for solicitation, sweepstakes offers, fraudulent emails, all of that? And then last and certainly not least is safety. Is your loved one careful about turning off appliances such as the stove or an iron? Does he or she ever carelessly leave candles or cigarettes burning? Are sharp objects properly put away? Are the stairs and hallways unobstructive, or are they safe to go up and down? Are the doors and windows locked? Is he or she able to easily locate the keys? Is there any reason to believe someone is trying to control or take advantage of them? All things that they really do need to consider. Okay, so now let's, sometimes we need to let caregivers express how they are feeling, both good and bad. And so now we're going to look at some of the emotional aspects that are associated with caregiving. And this is going to start getting into your role as someone who might work in your church with family caregivers, either as a minister or older adult minister, or works directly with caregivers, or in your daily life and in all that you do. So the first one is grief. And not only a lot of caregivers feel a lot of grief. They have lost the parent or the grandparent or a child that has a disability that they thought was doing fine, and so they're dealing with a lot of grief. On the other side of that, they might be feeling a great deal of joy that they have the opportunity to take care of a family member. They might be feeling stressed as they do they deal with some of the daily challenges of caregiving. On the other hand, they might really feel gratitude for having the opportunity that they live close to a parent that they're able to take care of them. After all, their parent took care of them for many years, so they might be feeling gratitude about being able to take care of a parent. Are they experiencing burnout? That kind of follows stress, not being able to handle as many things as before. Are they showing appreciation? Do they feel appreciation for their for their siblings and what they're able to do themselves? Are they dealing with depression? Is their role as a caregiver bringing about depression that they've never felt before? Are they feeling isolation? They feel like they're the only person that is doing caregiving. Sometimes a caregiver support group can help somebody with that isolation if they know that other people are in the same situation that they are. Are they feeling relief? Their person might be doing better, and so they're feeling relief now. And that's the emotion that they're dealing with at the time as somebody goes for they thought their parent had dementia, but it turns out that they just had a chemical imbalance and was making them confused. Do they deal with helplessness? Are they feeling like there's just nothing they can do that seems to be the right thing? And unfortunately, some of those bring about resentment of their siblings or the person that they're caring for. And so those are all emotional aspects that are associated with caregiving that we need to look at. So the next thing I want us to look at is problem solving. So now that we've identified some of the challenging feelings, we can now help caregivers to look at different problem solving techniques. And I'm going to talk to you about 2 different techniques. So the first one is called a type 3 or a 6-square grid. And it looks at problem situations and then the feelings that are associated with them. So you have elements that nobody can change. So let's look at a problem with an element that nobody can change. The person you're caring for has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Can anybody change that? No. The diagnosis is there. It's the person has gone through tests. And so to sit there and to worry and to try to figure out problems on how to change that, it's just not going to work. The diagnosis is there and you have to accept it. So that is really an element that nobody can change. Next, elements somebody else can change, but maybe not you. So an example of that would be that you have a sister that also lives in town, and that the both of you are supposed to be taking care of your mom. But your sister has got a lot of things on her plate. She's still working in a job, and she really doesn't want to, since she works all week, she really doesn't want to give up her weekends. And so to get her to help out with mom has been really difficult. But this is something that you really cannot change yourself, but your sister has to change herself. She's got to work out her own priorities, and she's got to decide what she's going to do. So this is definitely an element that somebody else can change, but really not you. And then the last one, the last type, is elements that you can change. And so an example of that one would be the person that you're caring for is following you around the house all day. They are dealing with dementia. They don't ever seem to let you alone. They're very, at this point, dealing with some paranoia. And so they just want to be in your presence all the time. Well, you have other family members maybe that can help provide respite. They can come in and stay with a parent. Maybe you have a neighbor that wouldn't mind giving an hour a week to come over and stay with your mom, who is in your home now that you're taking care of. Or you have your church members that know your husband very well and know a little bit about his diagnosis, and they would be more than glad to give you some respite. So this is definitely an element that you can change yourself. This is something that you can look out and that you can do something about. And those are just 3 different examples, but all of those examples bring about different emotions and different feelings. They could be feelings of frustration. They could be feelings of relief. They could be feelings of regret. And so all of these are that go along with these 3 problem situations. Okay, so let's look at another problem-solving technique. And this is one that comes from the Dealing with Dementia workbook that the Rose and Carter Institute for Caregiving put out several years ago, and I'm a trainer for that program. And it's a problem-solving technique that gives you different elements in solving a problem to get to a solution. And so it takes you piece by piece through that problem. So first, it wants you to define the problem, define specifically what that problem is. Think about what has worked in the past. Think about the problem that you define, what has worked well in the past, and what hasn't worked. Then set a goal. So a goal for that problem would be that, an example would be, and the one I can think of is one in the book, is that the wife's husband is getting up in the night and going to the bathroom, and he's unable to find the bathroom in their bedroom, and so he's urinating in the closet instead. And so the wife's goal at this point is to get rid of that problem, and is to help him figure that out on how to get to the bathroom. So you consider possible solutions to that, which might be to put a sign on the bathroom door that says bathroom, put a sign on the closet that says closet, put the light on in the bathroom so he can see it better instead of just using a night light. So there's several different possible solutions that you can consider. Then you practice those different solutions and those different strategies to see which one works. You troubleshoot possible barriers. One possible barrier might be that you don't sleep well if there's a light on. So if you've got the bright bathroom light on, then that could be a barrier for you getting in and sleep at night. So maybe you need to look at getting a mask that you can wear to bed. Then try out the selected strategies that you think will work, measure the success of those strategies, and then determine what your next steps are going to be in this problem-solving process. And if you go through each one of those steps, I think you'll find that can really be helpful. Okay, so now getting down to the meat of how a faith community can respond to helping caregivers and to what you can do with caregivers within your faith community. Okay, so we often pray in our worship services for those that are sick, those that have had recent surgeries, but we kind of forget to pray for their caregivers, the people that are taking care of them at that time. So that might be something that you want to add to your bulletin or during your prayers of the people. Establish a family caregiver support network, or maybe a buddy system with people in the congregation. Have people in your congregation help a family member that is caregiving for a spouse by going to their home and starting a buddy system. Establish a healthcare equipment loan program. You might want to sponsor one for your community or for the churches in your community, and start collecting things that you can loan out, which is healthcare equipment. Train congregants to be lay pastoral counselors to support the emotional and spiritual needs of your congregation. Some of you might have heard of Stephen's ministers. Those are trained individuals that really do this. They support the emotional and spiritual needs of people in their congregation. Each person is assigned a few people within their congregation. And so there are several different things like Stephen's Ministries that you can do. Honor your family caregivers with an event, whether it's one big event once a year, or whether it's every 3 or 4 months, honoring those that are caring for people in their homes, especially that are doing 24/7 care, can be really helpful and encouraging to those individuals. Provide educational programs and/or materials on dementia, end-of-life planning, and the millions of other topics of interest to caregivers. And so if it's a topic of interest to older adults, it's probably a topic of interest to caregivers also. Okay, initiate a volunteer caregivers group and/or respite caregivers group. Again, if you have volunteers in your congregation that are willing to offer respite, but would like to have a kind of a group themselves of these different respite workers, this would be a great opportunity to do that. Start a health ministry by hiring a parish nurse, or recruit and train volunteers to be healthcare advocates. I was in an automobile accident several years ago, and our parish nurse at our congregation was so helpful to me. I could not begin to measure how helpful she was in taking care of me for the 6 months that I was down. Provide space in a church or synagogue library or resource room where caregivers can find current information and help on various caregiving issues. just to have people in the congregation aware that if they've got books or magazines and things that might be helpful to caregivers, if they could donate those to the library, if there's a space that caregivers could go to find out that information. Organize a health and information fair for caregivers. You could do it just for your congregation alone, or you could do it for the overall community. Provide a secure central filing system to maintain records concerning individuals' desires about healthcare decisions and funeral pre-planning. This is really helpful if you're the caregiver for your elderly parent. Both of y'all are in the congregation. And if something happens to you as the caregiver and the individual that you're caring for needs help with healthcare decisions, where is that paperwork? So if you could find a secure filing cabinet that can be locked up, or you could do it through the internet, keep a file of what that person's information is that could be brought up only when needed, but would be helpful for that caregiver if anything happens to them. Provide space to have a loan closet of hospital equipment, canes, walkers, wheelchairs, bathroom stools, etc. This could really be helpful to people in the congregation who really can't afford to get some of that equipment. Incorporate caregiving issues into sermons, weeknight dinner programs, church school programs, especially during National Caregivers Month. In the United States, National Caregivers Month is the month of November. So having a special event during the month of November to recognize caregivers would be a really great idea. And then start a support group for caregivers. Like I've got 3, and it's a facilitator, someone that really has the feelings and love of caregivers. It doesn't take much skill. It just takes someone that's a really good listener. You can produce a newsletter for caregivers, or you can add a column in your regular newsletter that you have in your congregation that would help caregivers get some information that they need. I do a caregiver column in my my monthly newsletter, and it doesn't have to be a lot, just a tidbit. Stay in touch with caregivers via telephone, personal visits, cards. That's what I'm doing right now. I can't see those caregivers now since I'm staying in place, but I am trying to keep in touch with them over the telephone, sending cards to them, and that's really important, especially now when they're dealing with a lot of other challenges. Offer opportunities to learn how to become a better care receiver. You know, you have the caregiver, but you also have the person that's getting the care themselves. And sometimes people don't realize what they're going through themselves, that no one wants anybody to care for them. Everybody wants to be independent. So offer an opportunity in your congregation to have a session on care receiving. Become involved with public policy making and legislative advocacy on healthcare issues. There's plenty out there these days, and if that's appropriate in your situation, then that would be a great thing you could do and keep people informed. And of course, last but not least is encouraging. Always be an encouragement to caregivers. They're going through a lot in this day and time especially, and so it's just really important that you can keep encouraging them. Okay, so I have listed some resources here. I did some Googling in Canada to see and I found these 4 resources that looked pretty good. The University of Toronto has a family care office, and they offer a lot of information on caregiver support. The Canadian Patient Safety Institute offers a lot of safety tips for caring for someone. Carers Canada offers a great listing of resources. And then Comfort Life had a good listing of retirement communities and how a caregiver can work with retirement communities. And last but not least is the Presbyterian Older Adult Ministry Network. That's the group that I'm involved with, POAM. We do have a website. We offer a lot to caregivers and to all persons working in older adult ministries, which include we put a planning guide out once a year, early in the year, because as part of that planning guide, we put in a worship service for the month of May, which is Older Americans Month in the United States, and it's a complete worship service. We also provide different webinars, seminars. We have lots of resources on our webpage. We put information about our annual and our regional conferences. And so the Presbyterian Older Adult Ministries webpage, which is poam.org, can also be a great help for you. So that is, I'm going to turn my camera back on and go to stopping sharing my screen.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much, Pat. That was like so much information. But I mean that in an amazing way. Like, I'm extremely grateful. Just so many different resources people can tap into depending on where they are, and whether they're a caregiver or whether they're a church that wants to do more for caregivers. So I really especially appreciate all those amazing ideas at the end. We did have a couple questions that came into the chat that I thought were really actually very good questions. And the first one I'd like to bring forward to you is about caregiving and faith. And the question is, should Christian caregivers try to impart their faith to those they're caring for if the opportunity presents itself? So what is that line between like our faith and those we're caring for?
And that's a really good question. If it's in your church, then you probably, that's a no-brainer. I mean, you know that they're churched. As I said, I had 3 caregiver support groups, and only one of them really is involved with my church. So if someone brings it up and asks me a question, then I'm very forward and I'm very truthful and I'm very direct as to what my beliefs are. They all know that I'm Director of Older Adult and Caregiver Ministries at my church, because that's my signature line when I send them any of the notices, because I'm always sending my caregivers information on where they can get more information on things that they need to know as a family caregiver. So they know what I do. I don't know that any have left any of my groups because of that. But I think just, if they ask to share or if they want you to share, then I'm very open to do that. And, but I don't, or I have asked actually some people, do you mind if I tell you something that I have done through our congregation or something that I think would really help you? Also, one of the books that I'm using, and I used it earlier and I'm going to do a final prayer with it, is called Prayers for Caregivers. And I bring this out at a lot of my meetings. It is written by Patty, P-A-T-T-I, Normile, N-O-R-M-I-L-E. And I want to end with a prayer out of here also, but it's a good little book and I take that with me everywhere I go. And I make sure that people know that I've got it. And I've had several people ask if I could say a prayer out of that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The other question, one of the other questions is, how can caregivers ensure they're not being taken advantage of with regards to time, resources, energy, especially when we are a kind-hearted lot most of the time and want to be giving? So how do we ensure that there's not kind of advantage being taken of caregivers?
Well, it's funny you should ask that, because this morning I took somebody to the doctor's and I've been, of course, not leaving. I've been, not doing that. But we have a member of our church that people seem to think he tends to take advantage of everybody in the congregation. I see him as somebody that really does need our ministry. I see him as somebody that Jesus has called forward, not one of those easy people to love, but he's called for us to really help. So I am very straightforward with him. If I can't do something and he asks me, I tell him, and I tell him why I can't do it. I think you just have to kind of, show your love through being honest and straightforward with people, and letting them know exactly what you're thinking and ask them some maybe hard questions. And I don't hesitate to do that when I'm working with somebody.
Thank you for your answer. You had mentioned, here's another question. You had mentioned self-care deficits in like in Caregivers, so when they're
Right.
not looking after themselves.
Right.
Can you give any examples of when you've seen this? Like how's a caregiver or a church maybe to recognize that a caregiver is exhausted, or
Well,
how can you be aware?
the first thing that comes to mind is when they stop coming to church and they stop coming to events. I mean, they've always been really active in the church, and all of a sudden you don't see them anymore. And so you call, well, I've just had to do this and I couldn't. Well, but then it goes on weeks that you don't see them anymore. So that to me is the first obvious thing. So if I am aware of the caregivers in my congregation and I sing in the choir and I look over at the congregation, if I've seen that there's a caregiver that's been gone for several weeks in a row, then I call that person and I say, how are things going? What's going on in your life? And so it's really being aware of some of their patterns of what they usually do, what is normal for them, and then noticing what might not be normal. And I try to keep a pulse on not only, since I'm director of older adult and caregiver ministries, I've got a pretty long list of people in both those spots. A lot of the caregivers are older adults themselves, so they're double in the ministry. But I try to stay in touch with them on a regular basis. If it's not through cards, then through articles in the newsletter where I, ask them to get in touch with me with any concerns they might have, and they're doing that.
Mm-hmm. And when you would make, this is just a little follow-up, when you would make that call, would your call just be, hey, how are you doing? And then I suppose you act as primarily a listening ear.
Right. But I kind of call it a wellness check, and I've let them know that. So I say, I'm calling on a wellness check. How are you doing? How is the person you're taking care of doing? What are some challenges that you've dealt with recently that you'd like to share with me, or that I can maybe help you with? And I do the same thing in my caregiver support groups. I always ask them, what has been a delight this last month and what has been a challenge? And how can others in this group help you to work through some of those? And we don't want to only hear the bad, but we also want to hear the good. So tell me what's good has gone on in the last few days.
Thank you. That's helpful. The last question is a sort of a follow-up on the first one, but the question is about what about faith in a non-religious situations? So you said, would you in a caregiving situation share faith if you knew the person was not religious? Or I think you kind of answered that by saying,
yeah, I would if I have a friend that is a Buddhist, and he works a lot with caregivers, and and most of the caregivers we're in the South, we're in Georgia, so we have a lot of people out there with a lot of faith. And he's not the usual person that works with caregivers, but he opens himself up, and he's a great listener. And he doesn't, unless they ask him specifically about his faith, then he doesn't really share anything. But he is more than glad to share if you ask him. And so I think, again, just staying open and honest, and that's just who you are, and that's what you have to say. This is who I am.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We're getting very close to 1, and we've answered all of the questions. So I wanted to know if you have any last words, and perhaps you'd like to say your prayer from the book.
Right. Yeah. Well, and thank you so much for asking me, and this has been a pleasure, and I have really enjoyed today, and I hope that all of you got something out of this. I love this prayer. In the book, it was under kind of the miscellaneous chapter, and it's called Walking Backward. So let us pray. Lord of our journey, I feel I'm walking backward in time, caring for the mother who gave birth to me, who brought me fresh from you. She encouraged my initial steps across to Dad and led me in prayerful steps to you. Now the process is reversed. I walk with her, supporting unsure steps that falter. In prayer, we return to you, our Father. Thanks and praise to you, Lord God, for this round trip ticket and the blessing of such a treasured travel mate. Amen.
Amen. Well, just a deep word of thanks for sharing all of this wisdom that you've acquired. And I'm also would like to express gratefulness to all of you who joined us today for the caregiving that you're doing in your lives. Thank you very much. And just, yeah, on behalf of the Presbyterian Church in Canada, I just wanted to say a strong thank you to you, Pat, and to everyone out there. If you have questions that are looming, please feel free to email me, ehill@Canadian Ministries, and I'll pass them on to Pat. We'll find some answers for you. If you have some ideas about what could my church do, or you wanted to talk about having a support group and what that would look like, we're here to help you. So we'll make the connections that are necessary. Just contact the Presbyterian Church in Canada in some way and they'll know who to put you in contact with. They know where to find me. So a warm thank you to all of you and many blessings on the rest of your day. And thank you so much. Thanks, Pat.
Bye.
Bye now.